It started, as these things often do, with something small. Insignificant, really. My gate. Okay, let's be honest right up front. It wasn't exactly the pearly gates, nor was it the Brandenburg Gate. It was just a gate. A driveway gate. Black wrought iron, arched top, tasteful little spear points along the upper rail. Strictly decorative, mind you. Wouldn't want to impale the paperboy. Maybe, the scroll work was a tad more elaborate than strictly necessary. Perhaps I'd even snuck in a tiny, almost invisible dragon head motif in the center join. Artistic license, people. Why a gate? Why not? This is Oakwood Meadows, bastion of beige conformity, where the height of excitement is usually debating the optimal shade of taupe for mailbox posts. I figured a little character wouldn't hurt. Plus, practical reasons. It kept Mrs. Henderson's yappy poodle, Princess Fluffernutter III, from using my prize-winning petunias as her personal latrine. It discouraged the endless parade of people trying to sell me solar panels, discount steak knives, or salvation. And, if I'm being truly honest, there was that one incident with Gary's experimental jet-powered robotic lawnmower that went rogue and tried to annex my front yard. A gate just seemed prudent, defensive even. It also made a deeply satisfying clunk when it closed and latched. You know, that lovely sound of my property, my rules. Basic territorial integrity. Apparently, in Oakwood Meadows, wanting basic territorial integrity makes you some kind of rogue baron upsetting the carefully curated serenity. I was out there one sunny Tuesday afternoon, admiring my handiwork. Okay, admiring the handiwork of the guys I paid to install it, giving the hinges a quick spray of WD-40. Zen, you know. Gate maintenance zen, when she drove by. Slowly. Mrs. Eleanor Higgins, president of the Architectural Control Committee. A title she wore like it was bestowed upon her by God himself, probably engraved on a granite plaque, somewhere in her meticulously manicured and aggressively bland front garden. Her silver Lexus slowed to a crawl. Her window hummed down. Eyes, magnified by severe-looking glasses, scanned my gate. Scanned me. Scanned the gate again. A slight, disapproving frown creased her forehead. I saw her make a little note on a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand, because of course she had a clipboard. I gave her my most dazzlingly insincere, cheerful wave. "Afternoon, Eleanor. Lovely day for scrutinizing neighborhood compliance, isn't it?" The window hummed back up without acknowledgement. The Lexus glided away. Ominous. Very ominous. "Trouble brewing?" Gwen, my wife, asked from the porch where she was attempting to read a book despite my WD-40 serenade. "Just Eleanor conducting her daily audit of neighborhood joy levels," I replied. She seemed particularly offended by the gate today. "It is a bit pointy, Art," Gwen offered mildly. "They're finials, dear. Historical detail." "Right, finials." She went back to her book, unconvinced. The other shoe dropped 2 days later. Or, rather, the beige envelope dropped through our mail slot. You know the one. That specific shade of beige that screams official HOA business that will inevitably ruin your day. Thick paper stock. The Oakwood Meadows logo, an oak leaf gently strangling a weeping willow, probably, embossed in the corner. I recognized it with the sinking feeling one usually reserves for jury duty summons or letters from the IRS. "Uh-oh," I said, holding it up like a biohazard. "Incoming transmission from the mothership." Gwen sighed from the kitchen. "Let me guess. Your finials have been deemed excessively jaunty." "Worse," I muttered, tearing it open with excessive force. "Feels existential." I scanned the contents. Standard bureaucratic word salad. "Dear homeowner." So personal. It has come to the attention of the Architectural Control Committee. Translation: Eleanor Higgins is on the warpath. Regarding the installation of a non-compliant barrier structure at the aforementioned property address. My gate. They called my beautiful gate a barrier structure. It went on, blah blah blah, Section 8, Subsection D, Paragraph 2 of the Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, CC and Rs, blah blah blah, specifications for approved driveway entrances, failure to conform, violation of aesthetic standards, yada yada. Homeowner is hereby directed to rectify the non-compliance within 30 days. Rectify? How do you rectify a gate? Rectification requires complete removal of the unapproved structure. Removal? They want me to take it down, I sputtered, waving the letter. My gate! Completely because it doesn't conform. Oh, Art, Gwen said, coming over and taking the letter. She read it, her expression shifting from mild concern to resigned exasperation. Section 8, Subsection D. Is that the one about swing gates needing rounded tops? Mine are rounded, I protested. Mostly, except for the finials. And the dragon head? Subtle, barely noticeable. And the color? I thought everything had to be heritage greige or desert taupe. It's classic black. Wrought iron is supposed to be black. I was indignant. This was madness, beige madness. This wasn't about compliance. This was about Eleanor Higgins and her insatiable lust for absolute aesthetic control. Just then, as if summoned by the sheer power of my outrage, Eleanor's Lexus glided past the house again. This time she didn't just slow down. She stopped, looked directly at me holding the beige letter of doom, and smiled. A tight-lipped, smug, utterly triumphant little smile. Oh, it was on. That night, the dining room table became my war room. Forget dinner, forget civilized conversation. It was me versus the CC and Rs. Printouts everywhere. Highlighter fumes thick enough to require ventilation. Gwen brought me tea, patted my shoulder sympathetically, and retreated to a safe distance. Art, honey, please, she pleaded around 10 p.m., finding me buried under Section 12, Landscaping and Exterior Flora Standards. Just take the gate down. It's not worth fighting them. You know what Eleanor's like. She has the stamina of a marathon runner fueled purely by spite. Never! I slammed my fist on a paragraph detailing acceptable mailbox finishes. Okay, maybe I just tapped it firmly. It's the principle, Gwen, the principle! If we let them dictate our driveway gates based on the subjective whims of the beige Inquisition, what's next? Mandatory lawn flamingos? Forcing us to listen to smooth jazz during daylight hours? Where does it end? She sighed. Probably with us getting fined into oblivion and Eleanor doing a victory lap in her Lexus. Defeated, she left me to my crusade. I turned back to the accursed document, focusing on the section cited. Section 8, Subsection D, Paragraph 2, Driveway Entrance Gates. I read it. Then I read it again. Slowly. Permissible gate types include swinging gates, single or double, and sliding gates. Maximum height not to exceed 6 feet at the highest point. Materials restricted to approved wood composites, vinyl or aluminum painted in approved color palette. See Appendix F. Shades of Suburban Sadness. Designs must be simplistic, avoiding excessive ornamentation. My poor dragon head. It was all there, specific, detailed, and utterly focused on gates that moved horizontally. Swing gates, sliding gates, nothing else. My eyes narrowed. I reread the opening line. Permissible gate types includes, not are limited to, includes. And then it hit me, like a ton of meticulously researched, historically accurate bricks, or maybe a large, heavy, vertically descending slab of wood and iron. What if it wasn't a gate? Not in the way they defined it. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Medieval castle defenses. Portcullis design. Counterweight mechanism. Define gate. Definition of gate. A hinged barrier used to close an opening in a wall, fence, or hedge. Hinged or sliding? Mine wouldn't be hinged or sliding. It would descend. From above. Majestically. Defiantly. I turned to Gwen, who had cautiously reappeared in the doorway, holding a dust cloth like a white flag. A wild, manic grin. The kind that usually precedes an ill-advised eBay purchase, or a simple DIY project involving power tools and questionable structural modifications, spread across my face. "Gwen," I breathed, eyes gleaming with revolutionary fervor. "What if it's not a gate at all?" She eyed me suspiciously. "Art, what are you talking about? If it closes off the driveway, it's a gate." "Ah, but semantics, my dear. What if," I leaned in, lowering my voice conspiratorially, "it doesn't swing? What if it doesn't slide? What if it drops? From above, like a big, heavy, pointy... Welcome, Matt!" Gwen stared at me. Her expression went through several stages. Confusion, dawning horror, utter disbelief. "Art, no, please tell me you are not thinking of building a portcullis," I finished triumphantly, jumping up from my chair. "It's perfect. It's not technically a gate under their definition. It's historically significant. It's robust. It's beautiful. Art, it's insane," she cried. "We live in a split-level ranch in Ohio, not Castle Black. Think of the neighbors. Think of the resale value. Think of Eleanor Higgins having a complete, aneurysm-fueled meltdown on our lawn." "Precisely," I beamed. "They wanted compliance? Oh, they'll get compliance. Malicious, historically accurate, glorious compliance." Gwen just closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. "I need wine," she muttered. "Lots and lots of wine." Too late. The seed of rebellion, heavily fortified, counterweighted rebellion, had been planted. Project Portcullis was a go. My first challenge, finding someone willing to build a medieval siege defense for a suburban driveway. My initial calls to local fencing and gate companies were illuminating. Call 1. Me. "Hi, yes, I'm looking for a quote on a custom driveway, barrier, something heavy-duty." Contractor Dave, cheerfully. "Sure thing, we do beautiful custom iron gates, aluminum, security gates, you name it." Me. "Excellent. But I was thinking less swinging, more dropping. Vertically. You know, descends from above." Dave. "Excuse me, like a garage door?" Me. No, more atmospheric. Think medieval castle entrance, big, heavy, maybe some pointy bits at the bottom." Dave. Long pause. "Are you okay, sir?" Click. Call 2. Me. "Yes, I need a quote for a portcullis." Contractor Brenda, suspiciously. "A port what? Is that one of them new smart home gates that talks to your phone?" Me. "Not exactly new, Brenda. Think 12th century. Give or take a few hundred years. Chains, counterweights, the whole shebang." Brenda. "Buddy, I install vinyl fences and deck railings. I ain't building no time machine gate. Good luck." Click. Call 3. Contractor Mike, sounding tired. Johnson Fencing, Mike speaking. Me. "Mike, just the man. I need a portcullis." Mike. "A what?" Me. "Portcull is... big heavy thing, drops down, keeps the riffraff out." Mike. "Listen, pal, I install gates, not guillotines for your Honda Civic. You need therapy, not fencing." Click. Okay. Clearly, the mainstream fencing industry wasn't ready for my vision. I needed someone different. Someone who understood artistry, heavy metal, spite, which led me to Iron Mike O'Malley. His workshop was on the edge of town, a glorious cavern of noise and fire where he forged everything from delicate artistic sculptures to fixing gigantic broken pieces of farm machinery. Smoke billowed from the chimney. Anvil clangs echoed down the street. Perfect. I found Mike wrestling with a stubborn tractor axle, looking like Hephaestus himself after a bar fight. I nervously cleared my throat and laid out my plan, expecting to be laughed or possibly thrown out. He listened intently, wiping grease from his hands onto an already obliterated rag. He stroked his impressive beard. Then he threw his head back and let out a booming laugh that shook the corrugated iron walls. "A portcullis," he roared. "A goddamn medieval portcullis in Oakwood Meadows just to stick it to those HOA busybodies?" He wiped a tear from his eye. "Son, I love it. Haven't had a project this interesting since old man Hemmings wanted a suit of armor for his prize-winning pig." He clapped me on the shoulder with a hand the size of a cinder block. "Let's talk specs. Steel frame, wood-clad? How pointy do you want the bottom?" Victory. But I needed more than just muscle. I needed unconventional genius. Which brought me to my neighbor, Merlin Merle Jones. Merle lived 3 doors down. Retired engineer, mad inventor, possessor of a garage that looked like Doc Brown's lab after a particularly messy experiment. Merle hated the HOA with a fiery passion ever since they'd made him dismantle his solar-powered, automated squirrel catapulting system. Long story. When I told Merle my plan, his eyes lit up like he'd just mainlined espresso. "A portcullis," he gasped. "Arthur, my boy, that's brilliant. Utterly, magnificently brilliant. Take the fight to the Beige Brigade. We'll show them. I've got some old winch motors in the garage, salvaged from that automated dog-walking prototype, remember? Might just have the torque we need." Suddenly, I had a team. A slightly terrifying blacksmith who communicated mainly through grunts and sparks, and a neighbor whose last invention had accidentally launched his prize-winning pumpkin into low Earth orbit. What could possibly go wrong? The design phase was spirited. I argued for historical accuracy, drawings from dusty library books. Iron Mike argued for structural integrity. Needs 1/4-inch plate steel here, Art, or it'll fold like wet cardboard. Merle kept trying to add improvements, laser guidance systems for perfect alignment, motion sensors, so it drops automatically on unsolicited visitors, a smoke machine for dramatic effect. We eventually compromised. A monstrously heavy steel frame, clad in thick, weathered-looking wood, definitely not HOA-approved vinyl, operated by Merle's upcycled electric winch, which looked suspiciously like it came off a tow truck, with hefty chains and counterweights hidden inside supporting pillars. Pointy bits at the bottom were approved. Safety features were noted on a napkin. That might have gotten lost. Next came the installation. Stealth was the initial plan, initial being the operative word. Phase 1. Foundations and towers. How do you pour massive concrete footings and erect tall steel support pillars without attracting attention in a neighborhood where putting your bins out an hour early triggers a formal inquiry? Disguise? They're bases for modern garden sculptures, I cheerfully told a suspicious-looking Mrs. Higgins as the concrete truck rumbled away. Very abstract. Represents man's struggle against conformity. She wasn't buying it. They're trellis supports, I explained to a bewildered Mr. Abernathy on the phone after Eleanor reported suspiciously large metal posts appearing. For a very, very ambitious climbing rose. Needs the extra support. Very vigorous. Abernathy sounded unconvinced, but too stressed to argue. Phase 2. The big bits arrive. Stealth went out the window the day the main Portcullis frame arrived on a flatbed truck normally used for hauling bulldozers. It was huge. It was heavy. It was undeniably Portcullis-shaped. Iron Mike showed up with welding gear that spat fire and lit up the street. Merle arrived pushing his monstrous winch on a dolly, humming battle hymns. Gwen watched from the living room window, curtains twitching. "Art, for the love of God? It looks like you're installing the gates to Mordor. Mrs. Gable next door is clutching her pearls. I think Mr. Henderson just fainted." "Nonsense, dear," I called back over the shriek of Mike's angle grinder. "It's just robust architecture, very secure." Then came the testing phase. Oh, the testing phase. Test number 1. Merle, radiating confidence, wired up his salvaged winch motor. "All right, Arthur, moment of truth, hit the button." I pressed the up button on the jury-rigged remote control, which looked like a garage door opener fused with a speak and spell. The massive steel and wood frame groaned like a dying whale. It shuddered. It lifted maybe 6 inches off the driveway. Then, the winch motor emitted a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze and died, accompanied by a puff of sad blue smoke. Merle frowned. "Needs more amps," he declared, hitting it with a wrench. "Or possibly a capacitor from that old microwave." Test number 2, post-Merle capacitor upgrade. "Okay, try it now." I hit the button again. This time there was no pathetic whine. There was a roar. The Portcullis didn't just lift. It launched upwards with the speed of a Saturn V rocket, slamming into the newly installed upper stops with a crack-clang that echoed through the neighborhood like the sky was falling. Small children started crying 3 blocks away. Then, just as suddenly, the chain slipped a gear, and the entire terrifying mass dropped like a stone, embedding itself a good 2 inches into my pristine asphalt driveway with a sickening thud. "Huh," Merle mused, scratching his head. "Might have slightly overestimated the counterweight requirements, or underestimated gravity." "You think?" I shrieked, staring at the new crater in my driveway. Other glorious mishaps followed. We briefly trapped the Amazon delivery driver, a bewildered young man named Kevin. "Just leave the packages there, Kevin. I'll lower a basket. Don't panic." Oh. The main chain got jammed, requiring Iron Mike to rappel down the frame with a blowtorch like some kind of action hero. Merle's remote control developed a personality, deciding to only work when pointed directly north, during a full moon, while humming Wagner. Gwen stopped threatening divorce and moved on to actively pricing out studio apartments across town. She communicated primarily through exasperated sighs and the occasional muffled sob from behind the locked bedroom door. Naturally, the HOA declared all-out war. The beige envelopes arrived daily now, escalating in tone and font size. "Cease and desist order. Notice of violation unauthorized structure. Notice of accumulating fines. $100 per day." The fines were climbing faster than the national debt. Mrs. Higgins took to leaving passive-aggressive, handwritten notes taped to the increasingly colossal structure. "This monstrosity violates the aesthetic harmony and collective soul of our community. Lower this eyesore immediately. Have you no shame, Pendleton?" Poor Mr. Abernathy was clearly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His phone calls became increasingly desperate. Arthur, please, just stop. They're talking lawyers, serious lawyers. The fines are astronomical. Mrs. Higgins is threatening to chain herself to, well, whatever that thing is. My blood pressure, My response? Calm, polite, infuriatingly bureaucratic emails. Dear Mr. Abernathy, thank you for your correspondence. Please note the structure is still under construction. Furthermore, preliminary legal consultation suggests that Section 8, subsection D, pertains specifically to gates of a swinging or sliding nature. This structure operates vertically and thus falls under the category of novel architectural features. See Section 15, Appendix C, encouraging unique property enhancements, albeit perhaps interpreted liberally. Further clarification pending. I CC'd my imaginary lawyer. And then, one glorious, terrifying afternoon, it was done. Iron Mike packed up his welding gear, gave the massive structure a satisfied grunt, and accepted my probably too large check. Merle finished fiddling with the wiring, mostly. It stood there. The portcullis. 10 feet wide, 8 feet tall when lowered, made of thick, dark wood bolted to an industrial-grade steel frame, hanging ominously between two sturdy pillars disguised as, well, nothing really disguised them anymore. They were portcullis pillars. It was magnificent, horrifying, wildly inappropriate, and utterly undeniably mine. Neighborhood reaction was swift and divided. Gary from down the street gave me a thumbs up and asked if I needed help digging a moat. Mrs. Gable clutched her pearls tighter and started praying audibly whenever she walked past. Teenagers started using it as a backdrop for TikTok videos, #Castle Oakwood #HOA Wars #My Neighbor is Crazy. Mrs. Higgins was seen pacing, constantly pacing, back and forth on the sidewalk opposite my house, phone clamped to her ear, face a shade of puce usually reserved for medical emergencies. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I said to Gwen, who had cautiously emerged from the house. She just stared at it, then at me. "Art," she said slowly. "We are going to be sued into the next millennium." "Maybe," I conceded. "But think of the principle, darling. Think of the story." Besides, technically, it wasn't a gate. The final summons arrived, not in beige, but in a stark white envelope delivered by certified mail. You know it's serious when they require a signature. "Formal notice of on-site inspection and final compliance hearing," it declared in severe, bold type. "Date and time specified, next Saturday, 10 a.m. sharp. Attendance mandatory. Failure to grant access to the committee, Mrs. Higgins, the president, Mr. Abernathy, and HOA legal counsel, Mr. Stern, apparently, would result in immediate escalation of legal remedies, including but not limited to court-ordered injunctions and foreclosure proceedings." Foreclosure? They were playing hardball. "This is it, Art," Gwen said, holding the letter like it was radioactive. "They're bringing the lawyers, actual lawyers, not your imaginary one. Are you absolutely sure about this? We could just dismantle it? Pretend it was a temporary art installation." I straightened my shoulders, adjusted an imaginary crown. "My dear Gwen," I declared, perhaps a bit too theatrically, "they merely wish to parley, to witness the marvel firsthand. We shall receive them, with dignity, and perhaps a demonstration." Merle, predictably, was thrilled. "The final battle. Need any help, Arthur? I could rig up some sound effects. Trumpet fanfare, dramatic thunderclaps?" "Tempting, Merle, very tempting," I said. "But I think the portcullis itself will provide sufficient drama. Although I did let him install a slightly louder operational warning buzzer, just for atmosphere. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Too bright, too clear. Perfect weather for a suburban siege. At precisely 9:58 a.m., the HOA delegation appeared at the end of the street. Mrs. Higgins, marching at the front like a vengeful general, radiating righteous fury. Mr. Abernathy, trailing behind, clutching his ever-present manila folder, looking like he was heading to his own execution. And between them, a stern, sharp-suited man with a briefcase and an expression that suggested he billed by the minute and found this whole affair deeply tedious. Mr. Stern, HOA legal counsel. I stood ready on my driveway, flanking the entrance. The portcullis was fully down, blocking access completely. Solid. Imposing. maybe slightly rusty in one corner where Merle had spilled some experimental lubricant. I'd opted for a slightly too formal tweed blazer over a crisp shirt. Subtle intimidation through questionable fashion choices. Gwen was, predictably, peeking through the living room blinds. Merle was nearby, pretending to aggressively trim his already immaculate hedges, binoculars glinting in the sun. Showtime. "Pendleton!" Mrs. Higgins' voice cut through the quiet morning air. "Lower this contraption immediately. We are here for the scheduled inspection as per the official notice." I offered a serene smile. "Mrs. Higgins, Mr. Abernathy, Counsel Stern, welcome to number 4B. Apologies. The entrance is momentarily secured. Standard operational procedure, you understand." Mr. Stern stepped forward, flipping open his briefcase. "Mr. Pendleton, under Article 12, Section F of the Oakwood Meadows Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, the Homeowners Association, through its designated committees, has the right to access homeowner property for the purpose of compliance inspections with reasonable notice, which I assure you has been provided." His voice was smooth, professional, and utterly devoid of humor. "Indeed it has, Counsel," I replied smoothly, "and I am more than happy to facilitate your inspection. However," I patted the thick wooden cladding of the portcullis, "Article 14, Section B clearly notes that any modifications potentially affecting structural integrity require certified engineering approval prior to alteration, or, indeed, operation by non-designated personnel. This unit," I gestured grandly, "was certified by O'Malley Fabrication impeccable credentials, but your unscheduled interaction might place undue stress on the winch calibration. For safety, naturally. Wouldn't want any accidents." Mrs. Higgins looked fit to burst. "This is absurd. Stop stalling and let us in. Lower the gate." Ah. I wagged a finger playfully. "Not a gate, Mrs. Higgins. We've been over this. Per your own Bylaw 8, subsection D, paragraph 2, a gate is defined as a swinging or sliding barrier. This," I announced with pride, "is a vertically operating vehicular ingress regulator. Entirely different classification. Not explicitly covered regarding inspection protocols for temporary suspension or lowering by non-operators." Stern frowned, flipping rapidly through a thick, binder-clipped copy of the CC and Rs. Abernathy wrung his hands, muttering something about early retirement. Higgins looked like she was about to physically try and climb it. "Perhaps," I suggested brightly, "a demonstration is in order? To illustrate its unique operational characteristics? Stand clear, please. Safety first." I raised the remote control. This was the moment. Merle had guaranteed the upgraded motor and reinforced chain would work flawlessly. Ish. I pressed the UP button. There was a low hum, then a rising whine from Merle's enhanced winch motor. The new warning buzzer let out a startlingly loud beep, 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 and then the portcullis began to rise. Smoothly, yes, but fast, alarmingly fast. It ascended with relentless speed, the heavy chains rattling, finally slamming into the upper buffers with a mighty whomp clang that made Mr. Abernathy jump and drop his folder, scattering papers across the sidewalk. "See?" I announced cheerfully over the ringing in my ears. "Perfectly operational." Then I hit the down button. Another beep, beep, beep. The portcullis descended just as rapidly, chains whirring, wood and steel rushing towards the earth. It stopped abruptly, maybe 6 inches above the asphalt, with a ground-shaking thud that sent vibrations up through our feet. The HOA delegation collectively flinched back. I beamed. "Robust, wouldn't you say?" Stern stared at the behemoth, then at his bylaws, then back at the behemoth. Higgins was speechless, her face a mask of impotent fury. Abernathy was busy trying to gather his scattered documents, looking like he might cry. Stern finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Pendleton," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "While your structure is certainly unconventional and raises significant aesthetic concerns upon preliminary review." He paused, clearly hating what he was about to say. "The specific definitions within Section 8D do not explicitly prohibit a vertically operating barrier, provided it meets other relevant safety and structural codes, which you claim." He eyed the massive structure dubiously. "And it does." Mrs. Higgins made a strangled noise. But it's hideous. It's a monstrosity. It doesn't belong here." "Ah, aesthetics," I sighed dramatically. "So subjective, aren't they? One man's hideous monstrosity is another man's bold architectural statement paying homage to historical defensive paradigms." Stern ignored me, closing his briefcase with a snap. "The committee will take this under advisement. Further review of potential violations under broader nuisance clauses or aesthetic guidelines may be forthcoming. However, the specific violation cited regarding Section 8D appears debatable. For now." He gave a curt nod. "Good day, Mr. Pendleton." He turned and walked stiffly back down the street. Abernathy scrambled after him, still clutching his papers. Mrs. Higgins stood frozen for a moment, staring daggers at me and my portcullis. Then, with a final venomous glare, she spun on her heel and marched away. I had won, sort of, for now. Weeks turned into months. A fragile truce settled over Lot 4B. The threatened further review never materialized, likely lost in the depths of HOA bureaucratic inertia or Stern's billable hour calculations. The fines were quietly, mysteriously dropped from my account statement. Mrs. Higgins, defeated but unbowed, channeled her formidable energy into a new crusade, proposing a comprehensive bylaw amendment explicitly banning vertically operating vehicular ingress regulators, drawbridges, moats, crenellations, murder holes, and any other structures deemed excessively medieval or disruptive to suburban harmony. It's still tied up in committee. The portcullis stayed. It became a thing, a quirky landmark. Conversation Starter doesn't even begin to cover it. Gary asked if I rented it out for Renaissance Fair-themed parties. The TikTok teens filmed elaborate medieval dramas in front of it. Property values, shockingly, held steady. Apparently, a bit of notoriety isn't always bad. Gwen even started to come around. "Well," she conceded one evening, as we watched the satisfyingly solid thud of the portcullis securing our domain for the night, "at least I don't have to worry about Princess Fluffernutter's deposits anymore. And Kevin the Amazon guy seems to have gotten used to the basket." So, that's the story. Is the portcullis practical? Not really. Is it occasionally temperamental, especially when Merle tries to optimize the sensors? Absolutely. Does parking the car require a certain leap of faith and precise timing? You betcha. But every single time I hit that remote, hear that warning beep, and watch 800 pounds of steel, wood, and pure, unadulterated spite descend, sealing off my little patch of Oakwood meadows from the world. And more specifically, from anyone carrying a beige envelope and a clipboard, I feel a deep, primal sense of satisfaction. A man's home is his castle, right? Even if it's a split-level ranch with slightly questionable landscaping and a ridiculously oversized garage door impersonator. Now, Merle was telling me about trebuchet designs he found online. Small ones, of course, just for, launching water balloons or maybe delivering cookies to the neighbors. "Gwen, where did you hide my tablet?"